Right, it's 11 o'clock. Let's get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Richard Siddaway. I work in the UK for a company called Siddaway, currently doing a whole bunch of automation stuff for them. I've been PowerShell MVP for a number of years, and I'm one of the unfortunates responsible for this shindig, so if you've got anything to complain about, go and see Don. I want to cover the WSMan Cmdlets today. They've been there since PowerShell 2. They're not really used. You never see many people talking about them or blogging about them. I just thought it's about time they got their 5 minutes in the spotlight and we had a look at them, because there's a few things we can do with them that makes them quite useful. And I will be honest with you, one of the main use cases, they've been replaced by the Cmdlets, but there is still a bunch of stuff we can do with them that makes them useful. So, just to set the scene, WSMan, you all know how important it is to PowerShell. The two are intimately entwined, and if it wasn't there, we wouldn't be able to do half the things we can do. It's an open standard, SOAP-based, full name is Web Services Management, and we can use it to manage a whole bunch of things out of our estate, so servers, devices, applications, and even web services. And we can map SIM into it. Now, if you've heard me before, you know that I very occasionally do a little bit about WMI, and that was what got me interested. The one thing to remember is that there are two versions floating around in the environment. So if you're running WMF2, so PowerShell 2, you'll be using WSMan version 2. If you've got PowerShell 3 and above, then you're running WSMan 3. In terms of remoting, it doesn't make a heck of a difference, and one will talk to the other, and they mix and match quite nicely. It does make a difference if you're using sim sessions, because they demand WSMan 3, and you need to drop down to decom if you've got PowerShell 2 box at the other end. So, SOAP-based, that means you go through the whole serialization, deserialization. It means, most importantly, that what you're getting back are inert objects. So no methods. And it's exactly the same that you see on the sim Cmdlets. You don't get the methods. That's why we've got the invoke sim method. And it's there in the background for a whole bunch of stuff. PowerShell remoting, sim sessions. DSCs uses it in the background as well. And we can access it directly and do some fun stuff with it. Even lets us do some work every now and again. So there's a bunch of WSMan Cmdlets. First set work with the configuration. So you can connect to the WSMan instance on a remote machine and access it through the provider on your local machine. You can connect and disconnect and do what you want with it, and because it's a provider, you can use the standard item property Cmdlets and make your configuration changes. The session options, exactly the same as remoting, set SSL and all of the ports and all of that sort of stuff. The quick config, you've probably seen that flash past when you've enabled remoting. Modern versions of Windows Server, enabled by default, so you don't tend to see it so much. And test WSMan is a good way to get some information about the versions of WSMan that you're running. It's a good troubleshooting tool when you're trying to run sim Cmdlet against a remote machine. and it comes back with some weird and wonderful error message, 9 times out of 10 it's because you've got a WSMan mismatch, and you can quickly test it to see. Credits P. What do we use that for? Pardon?
Nothing.
Who said nothing? The door's over there. Cred SSP. It fixes the double hop problem for us. I'm not going to say anything more about these commandlets in this session because Alexander's got a session after lunch where he's doing a whole bunch on it, and he'll get a tad upset with me if I steal all this thunder. How many of you played with the diagnostics module? 1, 2. Yeah. There's some really good toys in there. If you do nothing else after you go back home, open up the diagnostics module and have a look what's in there. It's a really, really good troubleshooting tool. And we've got some tools in there for diagnosing WSMan issues, related issues. I'll be showing you those in the demo. And then we've got what I call the access commandlets, mainly because when I was writing this it was late at night and I couldn't think of a longer word. So, get WSMan instance, invoke WSMan action, new WSMan instance, remove and reset. Do they seem analogous to anything? A bit like sim commandlets, a bit like WMI commandlets, similar sorts of ideas. You can probably work out what they're doing just from the names. And we'll have a good look at those in the demo. Now, one of the reasons that people have run away in horror at the WSMan commandlets when they've looked at them is that the syntax. Is there anybody from the Microsoft team that actually wrote these commandlets in the room? Right. The syntax is bloody awful. It is really, really horrible. And it's quirky, and you have to scratch your head and work out why it's doing what it's doing. But once you get around that, they are useful. And one of the quirkiest bits is that you have to use a URI to get to something. And as you can see, it's a whole bunch of typing. So http:// blah, 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 blah. Thankfully, somebody took pity on the poor admins and came up with these aliases. So we've got aliases to get to the root of the WMI namespaces. That's the first one. We've got a specific one for getting to the root SimV2 namespace. And as Brian said earlier, that's the default namespace for PowerShell, even though there is a namespace called default. I had a look at in that while he was talking, and there's next to nothing in there. There's a version of std-regprov, and there's a couple of eventing classes, and that's about your lot. So why is the default there? You've got the WinRM and WSMan aliases. You'll notice that they go to the same URI if you look at the full length of it. And if you think that WinRM is Microsoft's implementation of WSMan, that explains that. And the last one is the shell, which enables you to find out some stuff about remoting sessions that are running on remote machines, which we'll see in the demo. Now, before I forget and before I go into the demo, how many of you were here last year? Yeah? Right. You all know Jason Helmick? He's the guy with the black shirt and the walking stick. Right. He stood up on the Tuesday, and as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from around here. And he introduced me, and he said, Richard's not from the US, and he doesn't speak English very well, so I'm looking forward to go practice and talk to him so he gets a chance to practice. So, I'm going to teach you a few words of an English dialect. And it's a greeting that is used in North East Scotland. And it's, I fit like for your Dean. So when you see him, please use it, because I want to watch his face when you start talking to him. So, I fit like for your Dean. Remember that, and wind him up. Okay, let's have a look at the demo. And we'll start by looking at the provider and the test WSMan. I'll make all of the slides and the code available. They'll either be through the PowerShell.org site, or I'll put a link on my blog to them. So, test WSMan, nice simple commandlet, nice simple results. The important one is this bit down at the bottom here, stack 3.0. That's your version of WSMan. If you've got 3.0, Sim will work for you. If you've got 2.0, you're dropping back to decom or using the WMI. Or you can use the WSMan commandlets if you're feeling brave. Ooh, shouldn't have said that. Okay, you will notice that the OS version comes through as 0. Again, you know I said everything with these is awkward. You always have to take that little extra step. So, use the authentication parameter. It's just telling it to use the default, which is the parameter, the credentials that you're logged on with, and you'll then see the OS version and the service pack. You get a as you can see, you get a whole bunch of XML stuff. And it's not very pretty, and it's not that interesting to look at, but I just wanted to show that it was XML coming back. And you also see the schema that's coming back. And if you think that I missed one of the schemas off when I was running through the URIs, you're right, I missed off the Sim v2 one, because it doesn't really apply much to Windows. You use it against non-Windows. There's not an awful lot more in there that's useful. You get a whole bunch of XML. If you want to unravel that and play with it and look at it, be my guest. The important thing is that product version line. Everything else, probably just forget about it. But the important takeaway with test WSMan is it enables you to test the version that's running on your local machine and remote machines. And this is my other machine, my remote machine, and it's running the same version, which it should do, and that makes all life very easy. I mentioned the provider. You all know about providers, don't you? Don't have to explain them. Yeah. Anybody not? Excellent. And if anybody's wondering why I'm using ls, it's because I'm lazy. It's not because I come from a Unix background. I hate typing. So you can look at the WSMan drive and you see the computer name, localhost. As with any provider, you can drill down into that, so you see a whole bunch of stuff. And some of it is more useful than others. So you can see the standard endpoints. You can probably recognize them. Microsoft.PowerShell is your standard remoting connection. PowerShell 32 is if you've got a 64-bit, so it gives you the 32-bit option. There's the workflow, sort of there, and there's the server manager. And then you've got a few others lurking in there that work in the background that you don't really use directly, so the event forwarding and the WMI provider. Connecting to a remote machine is dead easy. As with anything else, you give it the computer name, off you go. And then you get another entry in your provider. And you can work with it exactly the same. So you can see your WSMan config, you can see your endpoints. Very useful if you're not sure if you're using endpoints that you've created yourself rather than the defaults. Make sure it's been set up on that machine. And you can look at things like quotas. Does anybody play around altering these? Yeah? Do you get any benefit from it?
Yeah.
Good.
You can't remote install .NET 4.5 without updating the 1 gig version.
We'll change that. And as it says, we've got to go over to the other machine. Right. So reset that and then we'll disconnect. So you can use the provider to manage parts of your WSMan config. If it's going to be something that breaks your connection, it will probably make the change and then either appear to hang and time out, or it might just go ballistic. So if it's going to be anything like changing an IP address where you're going to break the connection, I wouldn't recommend doing it remotely. If you read the PowerShell and WSMAN book at all, you remember the bit where I was changing IP addresses remotely and the fun and games I had with that? Don't. Right. So that's looking at the provider. And once you've disconnected, it goes. And you can connect to a whole bunch of machines and access them through the provider. Right. Let's have a look at a little bit of troubleshooting. So I showed you the diagnostics module, or I showed you the WSMan cmdlets from the diagnostics module that relate to what we're talking about today, but there are other things in there, so you can trace what's happening with your PowerShell sessions, you can look at the log properties. I would recommend that you dig into these. The help files, quite useful, and got some good examples. So we'll get today's date. We'll enable the trace. This is one of these things like transcripts. You have to enable it, do whatever you're doing, and then disable it. And we'll invoke a standard remoting type command. And that was passed. It gave us data from Summit 01, and it failed on 2, mainly because it's not running. You won't always get, this is a contrived example, but you won't always get a sensible error message coming through. So disable the trace and then start looking at the logs. And what it does is it puts all of its stuff in the Microsoft Windows PowerShell operational log, which is one of the new style logs that was introduced in Vista, so you've got to use WinEvent. Because it puts a whole bunch of PowerShell stuff in there, that's why I did the get data at the beginning, just so that we can take the stuff that we need for this. And all I'm going to do is display the messages that you get back. So it steps through recording what it's doing, so it's creating the run spaces, opening them, it's modifying the activities, it's connecting and doing stuff and closing. and then you get the error messages, and you see the run stage changed to broken when it couldn't find submit 02. As I said, this is a very, very simple example just to show you that they're there and the sorts of things that you can get. Because what I really want you to do is to get yourselves a copy of the PowerShell Deep Dive book. Anybody got a copy? Yes, excellent. It was a book that was written by a bunch of MVPs and other PowerShell experts. All of the royalties go to Save the Children, and our publishers give us a very good deal on the royalties. So not only do you get a very good book with a lot of very, very useful information, you're helping support Save the Children. But if you only buy one PowerShell book this year, please buy that one. Right, let's start looking at the access commandlets, the WSMan instance and friends. So you've all probably used get sim instance or get WMI object. You use saw Brian's. A lot of you were in here for the previous session, saw Brian's session. And this is a fairly normal place to work. So you get class name and you get some stuff back. So you would naturally expect that something like that would work. No. And this is the point at which most people go, what? Don't understand. The problem, it's not that. The problem is that I can't type. Problem is that you're pulling back multiple objects. And if you're pulling back multiple objects using the WSMan instance commandlet, you have to use this enumerate switch, which basically tells it, you've got more than one thing to work with, so enumerate through them and then give me them back. If you just got a singleton class like Win32 operating system or Win32 computer system, you don't need enumerate and it works fine. But this is the first oddity. And I just limited it to the name so it's not scrolling past a whole bunch of stuff past. The second oddity is that if you want to pick a particular one back, you use this selector set parameter and you get a hash table and it property and value. And that works quite nicely. The thing to notice though, I don't know. Yeah. Can you see the install date and the value?
It's not very helpful.
The WSMan commandlet, if the value is null or empty or just not there, it'll give you the property name back as the value because it doesn't like, it's not like vacuums. So just be careful with what you're expected to get back because you sometimes don't get quite what you expect. I told you these were quirky. So can we do something like this, which we could do quite easily with the WMI state equals running, and you'd expect to get back all the services that are running. Nah. And well, maybe we should use enumerate because we've got likely got more than one service running. If our box is still up on its hind legs and talking to us. Nah. The problem is that selector set works on the key of the WMI class. That's the only way you can work with selector set. So if you want to pick and filter on properties that are not the key to the class, you all know how to find the key of a WMI class. Yeah, they're all saying. You get sim class, search through the properties for a qualifier of key. I've got a couple of posts on my blog about it. I'll stick the code in with the drop that I do for this. So you do a WQL filter and that will pull it back. But you need that star on the end, which basically tells it to go through everything, and then you need the enumerate, and then you need the filter. So let's have a look at now we've got some of the quirks out of the way, let's have a look at actually using it. And we'll start with the WinRM stuff. So this is the sort of stuff that you've seen already. Exactly the same information that the provider gives us back. And we'll just look at one of them. So we'll pick off the standard PowerShell one. And you get back the sorts of information that you would expect. So you can pick up the name and the SDK version. Did anybody ever have any problems updating 2008 R2 to 2012 if you did an over-the-top install with remoting? Yeah. Screwed up a bunch of the WSMan settings. Neat way to find out what it was doing if you still got any left to do. You can run these against remote machines and just so you've seen those before, the SDK version, whether it's enabled or not, and the 64 or 32-bit. So you can dig down in, it's another way to dig down into the WSMan configuration. And if you use the WSMan alias rather than the WinRM alias, you get exactly the same stuff, which is not a surprise because you're going to the same resource URI. Even with the alias, you're still tagging stuff onto the URI. These, even with the aliases, these can get quite long. If you want an exercise in frustration, try typing out the whole thing. It will keep you busy. You can look at machines, see what's going on by protocol. You can display a full object. Again, as you expect, there's not an awful lot more there, but you can get the IP addresses it's listening on quite neatly. And this is exactly, well, not exactly, but it's the same sort of information that comes across from the provider. And you can find IP addresses directly. That's quite useful to find out what it's actually listening on. Again, this is a little bit pernickety, so if you try to use a wildcard on the transport, it will fail. And don't try using the WMI wildcard because that will fail as well. And it's failing on HTTPS because there aren't any. A lot of times the WSMan cmdlets don't fail gracefully. You know, with a lot of cmdlets, if you search for something with the get cmdlets, you search for something and there's nothing there, it just gives you nothing back. No, these complain. Okay, Brian stole the thunder on this one. Who can remember what the default namespace is for WMI? Sorry? Rootsim v2. There you go. Says me. There you go. Enjoy. So as that's a singleton class, you can pull the stuff back. You get exactly the same stuff back as you would expect from using the WMI cmdlets or the sim cmdlets. Now, if you really want to be awkward, you can actually use resource URIs on the sim cmdlets. But you have to type the whole thing. The aliases don't work. I tried it. The resource URI is a parameter on the sim cmdlets. I've never, ever seen anybody using them. It would be a last resort because it's a pain typing them. I wonder if there's a way you could use one of the URL shorteners to do it. If you want to go into a non-default namespace, with the sim cmdlets, you just list the namespace. And did you know about that class that enables you to show the modules you've got on a machine? I whizzed past that a little fast. So in the root Microsoft Windows PowerShell v3 namespace, there's a class named ps_module, and it'll give you a list of the modules installed on the machine. Okay, for the local machine, it's not going to do you a lot of good, but you can access remote machines, and if you need to test if something is installed, especially if it's one of your proprietary modules that you're pushing out through your organization, this is quite a good way to test remotely. And you can do the same thing with WSMan instance. You just use WMI as the start of the resource URI rather than the WMI Cmdlets. You saw when I went through the slides that there's you can work with methods, so we haven't got calc running on the other machine, so we'll set it going. The invoke WSMan action, very much like the sim cmdlet, so you give it the name, except its action rather than the method name, and its value set rather than argument list. And it just goes off and does the same job. Again, return value 0 is good, everything else, it's gone wrong. And if you can find the documentation that explains what the individual error messages mean for particular classes, you're doing very well, because most of them aren't documented. So it ends up with you trying to work it out from related classes and hoping. And you can see it's running. This is another thing that doesn't work. You can't. Sorry. Normally you can. Right. What you can't do is. I lost my train of thought there, sorry. Right. What I was trying to show is that you can't get the thing directly. That you need to use the key to the class, which is the handle for a process. So once you've got the handle, you can pull it back, or you can use WQL query. Notice on the WSMan instance cmdlet, it's not query, it's filter, which again is another source of confusion. And what you can't do, as you can with the WMI cmdlets or the sim cmdlets, is do a get and then pipe into remote, because it asks for the resource URI. And why? Is because there's no pipeline input on the remove cmdlet. So you have to do it all yourself, and then it's gone. Okay, we can modify properties. If you've looked at PowerShell WMI, the classic example, and the one they give in the help file, is modifying the label on a disk. I didn't want to redo that, so I'm going to change the port on my listener. And again, it's value set and a hash table for the name and the value. This is one of the few places where PowerShell is case sensitive. So if you do port with a small p, it will fail. It has to be capitalized correctly. Don't try and change the port on the remote machine, because that's where you break the connection. set that back before I forget and break the rest of the demo. SIMD2, if you remember back to the list of resource URIs, that starts schemas.dmtf.org rather than the Microsoft one. You can use that for querying things like ESXi hosts, and there's a bunch of stuff floating around doing that. Luke Deacons has got a bunch of posts about doing that if you want to see it in action. Because we didn't think we'd got network connectivity, I'm not showing this one. And the last one is the shell, which shows which is a good way to work with remote sessions. So, looking on the local machine, nothing. Looking on the remote machine, nothing. And you see how inconsistent this is, because this doesn't throw a wobbly because there's nothing there. It's just, somebody was having a good time with this. So let's create a new session. You can see it's there. And if you use the resource URI, you can see that we've still got nothing locally, which you'd expect. And if you look at the remote machine, we've got a session. And there's a couple of useful pieces of information in here. And those two in particular, the owner and the client IP. So you know where that session's coming from. So if you want to go and shout at somebody because they've left sessions there, you know who you can shout at. That's worth the price of admission and the price of using these commandlets. And you can actually start working with them. I was putting this demo together, and I just did this because I often just use the property name with $1 in front of it for my variables. And it did that on me, and I was thinking, what? Shell ID is actually one of the automatic variables. And it basically tells you what version, something about the PowerShell that you're running. So don't use it. So we'll get that, and it's a lovely thing that you enjoy typing in. And we can get hold of it on the remote machine, which is what we saw earlier. And again, we can't just kill it off directly, so we need to remove it, and because we know what it is, and shell ID is the key to it, we can take it out. And at that point, nothing on the remote machine. You've got a broken session left on the client, but he shouldn't have been connected to our machine in the first place, so that's his problem to sort out. But we'll tidy it up. And that's the end of the demo. If you want to learn more about this, there's a chapter in the PowerShell and WMI book. There's bits and pieces scattered through PowerShell in depth, and there's some stuff on my blog. It's now 22. So, any questions?
I have a question. Have you seen a case where test WSMan doesn't work, where if you actually try and enter a PS session, it does? So sometimes the error, if you just use the test WSMan, it may seem that the machine's unreachable, when in fact if you actually do use DCOM, it will.
The only reason that we couldn't use test WSMAN is if this WinRM service wasn't running. You get no response there. If the service is... Actually, no, you could disable all of the endpoints as well. Yeah, that would be a good interview question, wouldn't it? Disable all the endpoints and ask someone to troubleshoot it. Ooh, yes. Yeah, so if the WinRM service isn't running, or the endpoints have been disabled or totally misconfigured, then you'd have difficulty connecting. DCOM is more difficult difficult because you've got things like the firewall in the way, the income service in the way, and I'll be actually demoing that in my session after lunch. So on the later versions of the Windows servers where remoting is enabled by default, my expectation is that test WSMAN would work, and it's almost a case that it doesn't work. That is a huge light bulb going off that there is something drastically wrong on that box and I need to actually go and look at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? In that case, thank you very much. Lunch awaits. Enjoy.